I've been using this tiny little camera for over a year now, and oh boy, do I have some things to say about it.
Sometimes you're like a dandelion, thrown right in my sight. But baby, when you make me smile.
Hello everyone, Ben Gray Digital here, and today we're looking at the Sony A6400, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. Just like the good, bad, and ugly of our sponsor. This video is sponsored by bengrayphoto.com. There's only so much I can tell you about this camera in this video, so go check out my work over on bengrayphoto.com. Everything currently on there has all been captured on the Sony A6400. Version 2.0 is coming soon, so keep an eye out for that. So go check out bengrayphoto.com to see the work I've done using this camera. Let's start with my favorite part about this camera, the build. Unlike most cameras, this camera does not have the large bump on top of it, which makes actually quite a bit of difference in portability. For example, if I want to get this thing off my neck, I can easily just take it off and throw it in my pocket. The body is about 4.7 inches long, 2.6 inches tall. From the tip of the grip to the screen, it's about 2.3 inches. The body weighing in at about 403 grams makes this thing very light. All that considered, making this camera extremely convenient to take around with you. There are several buttons you can program to perform specific actions, one of which is a dedicated control button. In addition to a built-in flash, this thing packs quite a lot into this small little body. The one thing to note about this flash is that it does sit rather low to the body, which means most lenses besides the stock lens get in the way of it, causing a rather noticeable shadow in a lot of photos. Now let's talk about the sensor on this thing. The 24.4 megapixel sensor is very solid, delivering some crisp and bright images with a decent dynamic range. The autofocus is very quick with 425 autofocus points, and it's able to do continuous shooting up to 11 frames per second, which is pretty snappy for a camera this size. Looking more at video mode, you can shoot up to 100 megabits per second, assuming your card is able to write at that speed, which means you can shoot at a variety of frame rates and resolutions. Going through my list here, this means at 4K, you can shoot at 24 frames per second, 100 or 60 megabits per second, Super 35mm, and non-Super 530mm, 30 frames per second, both at 160 megabits per second. As for HD or non-4K, all of which are Super 35mm, 60 frames per second, 50 and 25 megabits per second, 30 frames per second, 50 and 16 megabits per second, 24 frames per second at 50 megabits per second, and as for non-35mm in HD, 120 frames per second at 100 or 60 megabits per second. There are 10 picture profiles that you can customize, allowing you to change the color space or the recording format, including but not limited to S-Log2 and S-Log3. With that being said, video on this camera can get rather grainy pretty quick from my experience, so do keep that into consideration. All in all though, this is an incredibly good hybrid sensor. The screen on this camera is fairly good. The screen can flip around in a range of motions, including the selfie mode, so that if you're a vlogger or someone, you can go like this. Unfortunately though, the moment you put anything in the hot shoe, the screen gets immediately blocked. It doesn't sit very high and everything is going to kind of get rid of your view. Sony claims this has 921,600 dots. I don't know what that really means, and there's no exact resolution or frame rate, but if I were to guess, it's probably a maximum of 60 frames per second and a pretty average screen size for a camera. The viewfinder itself is actually pretty nice. It may be a little oversaturated every time I take a photo, and it actually looks splendid as all hell, but the moment I take it in the Lightroom, it looks rather gray and dull. Especially considering its size, having a viewfinder is incredibly nice. If you've ever used a Sony camera before, you'll know that the settings do run quite deep. The UI stays relatively out of the way, and you can toggle through a few settings of how much you actually want to be able to see while shooting. With that being said, my friend who owns a Sony 6000 says that this camera does actually get a bit laggy, especially when you first turn it on, which is a given obviously, but there are a few other issues that brings. If you're trying to go into settings to adjust the manual mode, such as the aperture or the ISO or the shutter speed, turning it on and trying to adjust those settings for the shot can be a little slow. This can become an issue when you're turning your camera on and off to be able to preserve battery, because this camera doesn't have the longest battery life on planet Earth. So in addition to a few limited creative styles, which are similar but a very dulled down version of the Fujifilm film simulations, for example on the camera that I'm using right now to record this, because this is my main camera. And how would I film this tech review about the camera that I use to record my tech reviews? Now let's talk about the battery. I've had both batteries for this camera for over a year now, so I can't really speak to their longevity just because of battery deterioration. What I can say about the stock battery is that it has held up very well over time. This 1020 milliamp hour battery is actually incredibly strong and lasts actually even longer than the Wasabi power battery that I have. That battery is a 1300 milliamp hour battery, and recently it's stopped charging to 100% and drains much quicker than the stock battery, especially when it comes to video. As unfortunate as that is, when I bought the Wasabi power battery, I did get a charging dock, which means I can charge both batteries at the same time, making sure everything's good to go after a long trip. One thing I forgot to mention while I was outside was what Sony reports for battery life expectancies. Sony reports that while shooting video actively, your battery will last around 70 to 75 minutes. While on video mode but not recording, your battery will last around 125 minutes. And in photo mode, Sony reports that your camera will last for about 360 to 410 shots. From my experience, I have gone on several day-long trips without having to worry about charging the batteries. As long as you keep the camera off while not using it to preserve battery, you'll have a pretty decent battery life expectancy. Before I go over the ports, do remember this camera is from 2019, which is 6 years ago, really? Jeez. Here we go, let's begin. One 3.5 audio jack, which is actually pretty standard for most cameras. Get ready for this. One HDMI mini. No, HDMI mini in 2019. No. I mean, I guess that was probably pretty standard. For 2019, I wasn't really in the camera market back then, and I feel like a mini HDMI is fairly standard for these cameras. Oh geez, and finally, for the last one, the main one, the charging port, a USB mini. No! A USB mini in the Grand 2019. We had USB-C for several years. It's 2019. That's around 2014. Mac adopted it in 2015. Come on, guys. We can do a whole lot better. All things considered, I don't really use the ports for much. It would be nice to have a USB-C, because then I could stream my camera feed to a computer without having to use an HDMI mini, which I have no HDMI mini in this house. It's 2025. This isn't exactly a very expensive camera, so I can't really complain. As for audio on this camera, there are two front-facing microphones, which, similar to the flash, get kind of blocked by the lens, but they'll do the job. In addition to a speaker on the side, which is fine if you're reviewing your footage, I guess. You're going to be looking at it on a computer later, so I don't really care. With that being said, I feel like it is actually quite quiet, especially considering it isn't much smaller than a modern-day phone speaker, so oh well. The Sony A6400 is equipped with 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, in addition to an NFC allowing you to quickly pair this device to your phone, allowing for the camera to access location information, sending images between this camera and your phone through the Imaging Edge app. Really, guys? Is that what we're calling it? The Imaging Edge app can be a little slow and finicky, whether that's because of the app or the 2.4 GHz connection. It's a treat to use, but it gets the job done, and it's a remote control, so I can't really complain. In addition to your smartphone, the Wi-Fi antenna on this thing allows you to connect to a TV or a computer. I don't know what you can do with that, whether you can look at media or something. I've never used it, and I don't know how you would use it, so Anyways, there's a lot of great things about this camera and I absolutely love it. So before going into the cons, let me say this. There are a few things that make this camera not great. We've gone over a few of them already, so let's get into the cons. The screen being blocked by anything that gets put into the hot shoe is actually very annoying. If you want to use anything besides the default microphones, such as a shotgun mic on this thing for vlogging, good luck with that. I wish you the best. As I've emotionally stated before, the HDMI Mini is annoying. It forces you to use the app, which can be a little irritating, or a more expensive external monitor, which I do not have. The grainy video footage can be a bit unusable sometimes. It's unnoticeable, and all things considered, the video does actually look very sharp for how small this camera is. But if you're trying to avoid grain in your video, that might be worth consideration. Another thing about video that I forgot to mention is that this thing loves to focus peak. I watch videos about lenses, and one of the big parts is focus peaking, and I'm sitting there like, I don't think it's the lenses, guys. I think it's the camera. I think the camera really likes to focus peak, guys. Currently I'm using my boyfriend's Fujifilm, so hopefully it isn't focus peaking. I don't know how to set it to manual, so right now it's locked on to right here on my chair. But other than that, the focus peaking on this is also frustrating, to say the least. Another thing that really annoys me about this camera is where they put the SD card slot. Because they're putting so much into such a small body, they have to put the SD with the battery at the bottom of the camera. Which means if you have it on any sort of larger tripod, you have to swivel the camera or take it off entirely just to be able to access the SD card slot. On normal cameras, the SD is usually on the side, and because it's on the side, they can often make room for a dual SD card slot, which this camera does not have. I personally don't care that much about having a dual SD card slot, but if I were doing more professional stuff, it would be something I would definitely want to have. One of the most irritating things about this camera is when you go to immediately turn on the flash, take a photo with the flash on, the camera completely crashes and takes like 10 to 15 seconds to restart into a very laggy state, which it'll fix itself over time, but the fact that it crashes when I go to take a flash is I correct myself, is extremely frustrating. But because I don't use this flash that often, I forget about it. So when I go to take a photo with the flash on and it suddenly crashes, the screen goes black, it has to restart, it makes a shutter noise. It's painful to say the least. And finally, without a doubt, the most frustrating thing on this camera is the lack of a USB-C. I said it very emotionally before, but the fact that it does not have USB-C is bothersome. You can only use the mini USB for file transfer and charging. You cannot plug this thing into Lightroom and use it as a viewfinder. You're stuck with a very limited amount of things, especially considering this thing did come out in 2019. I feel like they could have done a bit better. The USB Mini means I have to carry around another cord with me, which doesn't add a lot, but when I'm packing things up and I need to make sure I have everything, it's another thing I have to remember, all so I can keep this camera charged. With the cons out of the way, I can say this camera has served me incredibly well. And wherever I am 20 years down the line with whatever camera I have, this thing will always have a place in my heart. With that being said, this has been Bangray Digital. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts about the A6000 camera series. If you own one personally, let me know what your experience was with it. And with that being said, this has been Bangray Digital. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.